Welcome to the MarTech Matrix, a Blurbs production. Blurbs is the discovery platform where marketers and e-commerce leaders find the right technology faster. You get clear answers, real comparisons, and no sales fluff. Find your next partner at trustblurbs.com. This podcast brings that same mission to life. Each week, we connect MarTech founders and leaders with a co-host from the buy side, so you get both sides of the conversation. We'll explore what's working, what's hype, and what's next in marketing technology, all in about 30 minutes. And now, your host, Sean Simon.
Welcome to this episode of the MarTech Matrix. A big thanks to our sponsor at Blurbs. Blurbs is a community-driven platform designed to help connect buyers and sellers in a way that builds trust and confidence without the BS. You can find everything you need to know at trustblurbs.com. In today's episode, we'll be taking a candid look at how Nostra is helping brands squeeze more ROI from the same traffic by fixing speed, not buying more eyeballs. If your e-commerce site takes longer than 3 seconds to load, today's guest says you're leaving money on the table, and he's got the data to prove it. The blurb for Nostra reads, Nostra amplifies website performance by cutting load times, improving personalization, and boosting conversion rates. Their edge delivery system, crawler optimization, and identity extensions streamline the process. Ideal for e-commerce brands needing rapid, impactful enhancement to their site capabilities without heavy lifting on their part. Arthur, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's beautiful here in New York City. Nothing could be better than being here with you.
We love New York City. Well, let's give the audience a little bit of a background on you and tell us what led you to build Nostra.
Yeah. So I was doing a lot of cool work in the personalization space. And, we were working on product recommendation engines and content discovery and all of these amazing things. And we found that we could deliver very meaningful value there. However, the downside was that we would slow down websites. And so we found ourselves in this very interesting situation where there was always a benefit to what we're doing. But that benefit was kind of, hey, robbing Peter to pay Paul. Yes, conversion rate would go up because we'd have a more personalized experience. However, SEO and traffic would go down because Google and Facebook didn't like sending traffic to low and slow websites. And, we took a step back and we kind of realized, well, what's one of those situations where both sides win? Both the marketing team, the technology team, the e-commerce side, everyone wins. And, there are very few situations where that's the case, but site speed and just making your website faster. I've never heard somebody complain, oh man, I went on that website and it was too fast. And so we took a step back. We decided, all right, well, what can we do to universally make commerce websites faster? And that's how we came across the edge delivery engine. And I've been just so impressed about all the things you can do kind of on a Cloudflare edge instance.
It's interesting. Most of my career, I was been on the sales side, and everybody wants to put up their JavaScript or their tag, whether it's on the site, in the header, in the container tag. And every marketer, I shouldn't say every marketer, most marketers would say, well, is it going to slow down my site? I think that these marketers who aren't necessarily as tech savvy as maybe the engineers on the back end it's been pounded in their head. You can't the more stuff you put on the site, the slower it gets. Is there truth behind when you put more JavaScript up, whether it's in a container tag or not? Does that really slow the site down, or is there a way to do it where it won't slow the site down? And does Nostra solve for that?
So the answer is yes and no. Everything you do, every time you add something to the website, it will have an impact. It will slow down the website to some extent. Now, the question is, will it slow down the website in a manner that is noticeable to a human, or is it not noticeable to a human? So, there's simple things, right? If you have a script or tag that loads after the hero image, after the rest of the page loads in, technically the website is still loading, but for all intents and purposes, it's fine. With that said, and so there are a lot of different tools out there that help kind of you order which script loads in when, or you have a developer that can go through and kind of do that themselves. And, that's a common practice to have somebody on your team or a tool that helps with that. And that's very it's great, it's super needed. What we do at Nostra is slightly different. We focus on getting your server and your browser to connect as quickly as possible, regardless on if the browser needs to load in a little bit or a lot. And so the way that we do that is a typical e-commerce store has kind of two groups of parts of their website. Part one is a part of the site that is the same for every single person. So think about like your images. Images tend to be, there's some personalization, but generally roughly the same. Those all live out on a content delivery network. And so your website just wouldn't load in without those. Now let's say that makes up half the loading of your website. The other half is what's called dynamic content. Think about your like shopping cart, right? Sean would have a different shopping cart than Arthur. And so those tend to have to come from origin servers. What we do at Nostra is we actually focus on how do you get as much stuff that is kind of personalized out onto the edge, onto the content delivery network. So it can load in super, super quickly and go to for as little as possible to the origin. So that's what we focus on. So yes, the more scripts you have, the slower your website will be. And Nostra definitely does help just kind of raise the baseline. So, you can kind of expect when our software gets deployed, generally like a 20 or 30% faster website. Just, and whether that's taking you from an egregiously slow website, like a 5-second load time down to 4 or 3 seconds, or it's going from 2 seconds down to a second and a half. Um, one way or the other, we kind of always find it that we're faster.
Makes sense. Um, why do you think, given what I said earlier about how it always came up for me in terms of people worried about site speed, why do you think it's such an overlooked factor in the conversation around conversion optimization?
I think that site speed is it takes such a high level of technical expertise to work on it. And a lot of times you have somebody who owns conversion rate who's not an engineer. And so there's kind of a level of frustration with both knowing how important it is, right? They know that it doesn't matter what they do, the website doesn't load in, nobody's going to buy anything. And they own that key performance indicator. They own that KPI. But it's also such a technical project that they don't feel that their ability to influence it, but what is probably the most important part of the buying journey. And so there's just such a level of frustration that comes out of a lot of our buyers because they kind of look at it and they say, wow, this would be so awesome if my site was faster. And on top of that, I have no idea how to make it faster.
Yeah. I wish I had sold your product when I was younger. Then no one could give me that argument because I'm there to help them with their site speed, right? As
Exactly.
opposed to cause it slow down. Have you ever experienced like a moment or with a client where performance, the load of the site visibly killed the brand's growth?
All the time. And a lot of times we see that in the inverse, which is brand will come to us. This is, a brand will come to us and they'll say, oh, yeah, we'll make our website faster. And, we'll see a 30% lift in conversion rate. This isn't our like every day, every time it's a 30% lift, but, we'll see that. And then the brand will just take off from there because the difference in economics of a business when you have when you're able to have that sort of impact is kind of night and day. And so, it's kind of hard to say, hey, we know this brand didn't work out because their site wasn't fast. But we can say that there are a handful of brands that we work with that quite frankly would not be growing at 50, 100, 200, 300% a year if their site did not kind of have that initial boost in revenue, and both on the site speed side and conversion rate side, but also can have that sort of impact on the paid media side as well.
So what do when you're talking into the e-com community, like what do most e-com leaders get wrong when they're thinking about site optimization when it comes to speed?
I think a lot of the times people start with the KPI of conversion rate and work backwards from there. I think we all want a 5% conversion rate and win. But I think the way that, a lot of brand leaders think about things is just so like black and white there. I think you should really start with, hey, how do we make the customer experience the best? How do we go out and we surprise and delight our customers? Because when we look at the brands that are growing at an incredible rate, that's the only North Star that they have. They have KPIs that they need to hit and they look at and they optimize. But all of the ways that they get there, think about how do I put my customer first? How do we optimize to their experience? And so, site speed, yeah, conversion rate definitely goes up. There's no doubt about it. There's a one-to-one correlation between site speed and conversion rate. But even better than that, there's a one-to-one correlation with, site speed and how happy your customer is. Like, there's nothing more frustrating than scrolling on your phone on the subway and you get hung up and it didn't load in. Like, that's infuriating. And
Yeah.
we help fix that. Just like if you were to walk into a store and you were able to see just the perfect thing right in front of you right when you walked in, and the sales associate came right up to you and said, "Hey, I think that you want this," versus having to search around. Maybe this door closes in your face. That it's just a night and day experience.
That'll happen as soon as the AI agents take over the in-store experience.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have to imagine, as I've done this, when I experience what you just described there with a slow loading site or a site that doesn't load, I blame my carrier or my signal's gone or something like that. I never think that it's the website's fault. And I'm in the business; it doesn't really come to mind that often. So for people hearing this conversation for the first time, when maybe they just weren't familiar with this topic, can you describe Nostra in one sentence? I know I gave you my blurb earlier, but in your voice, what's Nostra in one sentence?
News is simple. It is a Cloudflare instance that makes your website faster, that enables you to track users not for 7 days, but for as long as you would like. You can keep the same cookie. You're able to protect yourself against bad bots and optimize your website for good bots, and generally do all of these things, whether you're an engineer with 30 years of infrastructure engineering experience or you're a digital marketer who just wants their conversion rate to go up and their customers to be happy. And so we fancy ourselves as a company that bridges a highly technical and highly important part of an e-commerce journey with a non-technical, very easy to use product.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think for a lot of e-commerce folks that maybe aren't familiar with this sort of category of solutions, they're blaming other things, and maybe they're blaming the wrong thing for their challenges, whether that's sales or site speed. So, what exact? Oh, actually, before we dive into the next question, you mentioned cookies are persistent. Cookies can stay longer. We've talked a lot about cookies on the show, especially when the topic of deprecation was hot. Can you explain to that? Can you double click into that one in terms of how do you is that a third party cookie you're referring to? First party cookie? How do you help it live longer?
Yeah, so there are really two groups of cookies as far as kind of a very high level explanation. The cookies that browsers like Safari see as mission critical cookies, and there are cookies that they don't see as mission critical cookies. If a cookie loads in from your own domain on the server, it is deemed a mission critical cookie. And so an example of that is, you notice how you never get logged out of Netflix? They set it as a first party server side cookie and it is mission critical. The issue is a lot of Shopify, a lot of e-commerce stores don't really understand the nuances or don't even quite frankly have access to their own first party domain. And so what they do is they either set it up as a subdomain xx.domain.com, which is where they kind of have their server side cookie, or they just set it via JavaScript on the browser. And either one of those are deemed kind of the second group of cookies, non-mission critical cookies. What ends up happening when you have a Cloudflare reverse proxy running is you get control over your own domain. And so you can actually just set the cookie by adding, we do it through a Cloudflare worker where you have your cookie is set and it lasts forever. And so whether that's your A/B testing tool so that people stay in the same A or B bucket, whether it's a Facebook cookie so that Facebook can track people not just for 7 days, but in perpetuity, whether it's your Klaviyo cookie or your attentive cookie, so you can send more abandoned cart emails and text messages and be able to track people and build out more robust profiles. And so it's very simple. What we do is we actually give you control over your first party domain. And then when you have control over that, we have a very simple solution that, again, doesn't require any engineering that will enable those cookies to last in perpetuity.
So you mentioned the product, the edge delivery engine. How does that how does that work behind the scenes? Like if I'm a e-commerce folk, I'm not high technical. Can you explain what it's actually doing behind the scenes?
Yep. So it is sitting as a Cloudflare reverse proxy. So it is enabling us to sit between the user and the origin. And we are kind of intercepting the request and caching the HTML of the website. Kind of think of like we're caching the structure of the website and kind of going pixel by pixel and saying, oh, this specific pixel needs to come from the origin, and this pixel can live on our server in a pre-built close to the user manner. And we're able to expand from half your website being on these pre-built, super fast servers to 99.9% of your website out there.
So basically, everything that's not super personalized is cached.
Correct. Yeah.
By the Let's talk about some of your other products, crawler optimization and root ID. Why do these matter for SEO and personalization readiness?
So when you think about personalization, you really can only personalize based on information you know about somebody. So without Nostra, you kind of reset the clock on anonymous users every 24 hours to 7 days if they come out. An iPhone was, 40% of most people's traffic. And so, if you want to continue to have a personalized experience, you have to build up a view of that person over not just a couple of days, but over weeks, months, and years. And so when your cookie ends up lasting 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, and so on, you are able to do on-site personalization. Your product recommendation is really much better for Sean if you knew he clicked on these 8 products and you can track him over a 2-year period. I'm a firm believer that these personalized e-commerce flows that are kind of, these Klaviyo flows that will be tailored. Each person has their own email. That only works if each person has their own data, right? If you can map somebody and view them over a 6-month, 12-month, 24-month period, you're going to be able to really deliver a truly personalized experience to them. And there's a lot of great work that's going to go into the modeling and the text creation and the image creation that's personalized to that person. But the only way that that's actually useful is if you have unique data on that individual. And the only way to have unique data on that individual, or one of the most important things, is having a cookie that lasts forever on that person. So that's another way we think about it. And then the crawler optimization is also right up the alley of how do you optimize for e-commerce, right? There's a whole slew of new e-commerce buyers coming from ChatGPT and from Perplexity and Claude. And when those crawlers come to your websites, you need to make sure, one, you are showing a fast experience, right? And so we've built out kind of a second product that has an entirely cached experience that is optimized purely for these crawlers. And then two, a lot of people don't realize that these bots are less sophisticated than Googlebot and that they don't render out JavaScript on your website. And so that means if you have a reviews widget that renders their reviews via JavaScript, when the crawler comes to the website, it will not actually render out those reviews. And so the mind of the crawler will not have all those reviews. And I think, it's too early to confidently say, hey, 100% having reviews has X, Y, and Z impact on these large language models. But I also think you'd be very naive to think that it's a good thing to not have large language models, read the good reviews about you. And so, kind of the crawler has kind of two very distinct, two very important use cases, which is one, allowing the crawlers, whether it's ChatGPT or Google or who have it, to read 2, 3, 4x the number of pages. And then number two is allowing them to actually render out JavaScript so that they can read all of the important information on your website.
So that's powerful because I'm one of those people that's using ChatGPT or Perplexity more for my searches. And I do notice that sometimes I don't get back complete data, and it's probably not using Nostra. And when you go back, I'm going to go back to root ID and like personalization, because you mentioned personalization earlier. And personalization vendors lean into the fact that they have this cookie, they know all this information about the user, and every user, they say, is going to get a unique experience. But to your point around, well, that's only if the cookie is persistent, right? If the cookie lasts between visits, are those companies, are those personalization tools, are they overstating their ability since they don't necessarily have control over the Cloudflare like you do?
They're doing the best that they can with the access that they have. It doesn't mean that they can't be better. I think that every personalization company is staying up at night and thinking, how in the world do I identify more users and get more data? Like that is the crux of it. The algorithms are one side. The other side is how do you get more data, garbage in, garbage out? How do you get the best information in there? And a lot of some of these companies, I'm thinking like Segment and Dynamic Yield, actually give you instructions as to how to set up a similar thing to Nostra on their own. The issue is that that's two or three out of the 1,000 providers out there, and on top of that, you'd only be doing it for two of the apps. And so the biggest and the most sophisticated players in the space have actually found a way and have identified that this is the best way to do it. The issue is actually implementing that if you're on a platform based site like a Shopify or a Demandware or Magento is impossible because you don't even have access to implement it without Nostra. So it's kind of been deemed setting up a cookie via proxy the best practice. The issue is that people don't have access and they don't have documentation for they might have documentation for 2 out of their 40 cookies, but not out of, not the other 38.
Yeah, this is a really important topic for the listeners. We interviewed a lot of buyers over the last 18 months. And in particular, last year, personalization was number one in terms of things that e commerce managers and marketing managers were thinking about. Like, how do we do a better job with that? And I think that they typically think about, okay, who are the personalization solutions out there? What can they personalize for me? As opposed to how do I make personalization better? How do I set that vendor up to be successful? I think this is probably a question that most people didn't think to ask, right? So hopefully, this goes to show how integrated all these technologies can be. Which brings me to my next question: how does Nostra integrate with a brand's existing tech stack? Does it work with any ecom platform, any analytics tool? Like, what do they need to have or not have to be successful with Nostra?
For the site speed tool, if you're on Shopify or Demandware or some of the other platforms, it's just adding a DNS record and we're able to handle the rest. And it is totally compatible. The tool that ends up being the identity tool, the cookie extension tool, actually works on any website on the internet. And so whether we have to bring over our own reverse proxy or they have their own reverse proxy and we just integrate within it, we're able to extend the cookies in 5 minutes. No work. You're just adding a worker or adding a DNS record, and we're able to go from there. And you should see, uh, you know, you know, 40, 50% longer cookie lifetimes within a couple months.
Okay, let's pivot a little bit to more about the customers and the differentiation that Nostra has in the marketplace. So, who is your typical customer in terms of your ICP? Who do you go after?
We work anywhere from publicly traded large enterprise, which is we love working with those folks and they're wonderful and they tend to really get what we do, all the way down to a Shopify store doing 10 or $20 million a year. And anywhere in between. And they're the buyers of our software. They're the VP of engineering, and that's great. And they really see this as a most efficient way to get their site to be faster or their cookies to last longer or whatever it is. And sometimes it's a CMO who's just saying, hey, I think that it's a better customer experience if the site's faster and I want a higher conversion rate. And so we work in kind of a ton of different verticals, a lot of ways. A lot of the time, you want both the buy-in from the technology team as well as the marketing team.
Makes sense. Okay. So how would they measure success? Like we talked about the speed earlier, but it's not the only data point. So how do your customers typically determine let's say a pilot what success looks like?
Yeah. Our customers look at success in kind of two groups. We have one group that says, hey, we need to A B test and see what the impact on conversion rate is. And so we give them hey, if you're willing to put your money where your mouth is, we'll do a totally free A B test. And we'll say is able to increase revenue by 3%, let's say, we'll call it a win. And so we'll run half the traffic through Nostra, half the traffic not through Nostra, and our customer will be able to look within their Shopify account and see, hey, Nostra delivered this amount of value. So that's kind of one option, and fairly typical option that people take. The other option is we have folks that say, "Hey, conversion rate, yeah, it matters, but we just want to make a website faster." And in that case, we're able to go and just deploy it at 100%, and you see that the next day, whatever real rum tool, whatever real user metric tool you're looking at, the site will go from here to here, and it'll just be that much faster. If it was a 3-second load time, it'll go down to 2, and you'll be thrilled.
So, first, this conversation has been amazing. I've learned a lot. I imagine a lot of people have. A lot of things that you mentioned stand out to me. But what makes Nostra remarkable in your mind? I guess maybe another way to think about that is why do brands switch to you? And maybe the question I should ask before that is, are brands switching from your competitors or are they coming to you and this is all new?
We believe we're the best product in the market. So, but most people don't have a solution. So it's much more blue ocean where we are either looking at Nostra or no one. So we believe we are by far the best product in the market and very, very much stand behind it. But a lot of the times people say, great, you can make my website faster. Great, it'll increase revenue. Sign me up. I don't need to wait and see what other things are going on. I'm just happy with a faster website. Um, and so, I'd say the 75 to 95% of our customers, are just that's kind of their perspective. They're not running an RFP. They just say, hey, yeah, I'd love to have a faster site. And then when somebody does run an RFP, I would say we win the vast majority of times because we've kind of the most robust platform in the space.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's one of those things where people people know some people might know that their site could be faster, and or maybe their other tools could be better, but they're not necessarily thinking about this because they don't know about it, right? So how do you communicate that message to the ecosystem, to the market that hey, you should be thinking about site speed and all the things that come along with the tools that you bring to the table?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my view is how many people have ever regretted that the person that they're emailing replies right away? How many people have ever loaded in a website and been like, oh man, that was too fast? And how many people have ever been like, oh man, that deal happened because we really took our time? If you come from the investment world, there's a saying, time kills all deals. You come from the sales world, that timing kills all deals. And this goes not just through our website and what we believe there, but it also is kind of how we approach customer support. I think our average response time is sub 3 minutes. And that includes, when people message us at 2 a.m. And because we believe that like time, like just responsiveness, both when we're talking to our customers, that's what they get. And when their customers are talking to their website, that's what they get. Responsive, fast, 24/7, time is what matters. And we looked at an interesting stat, which was, and this was when we were smaller even, but over the course of a year, we saved multiple centuries of people just staring at blank white screens. Like, think about that. Over a year, 100 years of human time, over 100 years of human time was saved from looking at a blank white screen. That's like, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that is pretty awesome. How do you measure that? It's focus groups? Like how do you measure white
Well,
screens?
you can, what we focus on is eliminating that like white screen. Like it just gets it in quickly. And we have a certain amount of page views. I don't know if it's 10 billion or 20 billion, whatever, however. And then we had, our average amount of time that we're faster versus not having us. And you can see that it came out to literally hundreds of years of time saved.
Yeah. If I were selling Nostra, based on what I heard today, I'd be focusing in on all the investments a brand has already made in these other tools that will just perform that much better with Nostra involved. So where do you see this space evolving over the next year and a half?
Well, I believe more and more of the internet will be happening on the edge. I think speed matters. I think the ability to route on the edge and make decisions closer and closer to the individual matter. And so To answer your question, where do I think the internet, and where do you think Nostra is going? I think that I would be very bullish that more and more logic, whether that's site speed logic, whether that's cookie logic, whether that's large language model optimization logic, more and more of that will be happening on a proxy, or whether it's security, whether it's bot protection. All of these things will be happening on the edge, or analytics for that matter. And so you should expect to see Nostra not only continue to improve our site speed, but to start to kind of horizontally become a platform that merchants look at as, "Oh, great, Nostra made my website faster, but also protected me from this DDoS attack, but also helped my cookies last forever." And
Very good. Okay, it's time for our lightning round. Are you ready for this? We'll go
shoot,
super fast, Arthur. A brand that you think is quietly crushing it online.
man, that's a great one. I am a huge fan of Passion Footwear. Haley, their CEO, is awesome. They have managed to scale without spending any money on ads, which is pretty great. When they first onboarded onto Nostra, this was the first time that they went viral, and we thought that they were under attack because they got a million sessions in a couple hours. And so that is a brand that is crushing it. And if you go check out Haley's TikTok, I think that every D2C founder should be doing stuff like that.
Excellent. A book, podcast, or idea that's reshaped your thinking lately.
I remember my senior year of college, I read a book, And Searching for Meaning, I think is what it was, about Victor Manning. I might be butchering this because it's been a while, but at the end of the day, us as humans look for purpose, and it's a story about him surviving the Holocaust as a psychiatrist, and how even in the darkest times, probably the most atrocious situation that's ever happened, people were able to laugh. Like, that was a very profound book and had a big impact on my life.
Your favorite aha moment from a client implementation.
My favorite aha moment from a client implementation was when a client asked to have access to their Cloudflare account and started showing us, "Oh, well, I'd love to do this. I'd love to do that. I'd love to do this." And we just started building with them.
Right on. Okay, so wrapping up, where can listeners find Nostra? Your URL, your blurbs page, obviously, LinkedIn. Tell us.
Yeah, our blurbs page, that's the best place to find us, especially if you're listening to this. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can email me, arthur@nostra.ai, and then obviously we have a website that works very well.
I would hope so. Anything new on the horizon people should be aware of? New product features? Are you hiring? Any events, hosting or attending?
We have a lot of stuff new. There will be a big announcement in terms of our cookie technology in the coming weeks. A lot of you might not realize that Nostra is running in the background on your website already, powering some of your major third parties. And so um, be on the lookout for understanding what Nostra can do for you.
All right. Arthur Root, CEO of Nostra, thank you for being with us today on the MarTech Matrix. We appreciate your time. For the listeners out there, like Arthur said, you can find them at his website at nostra.ai, on their blurbs page, which is trustblurbs.com, or on our LinkedIn profile. And that will do it for our show today. Look forward to talking to you next time. Thanks, Arthur.
Thanks. Take care.
That's it for today's episode of the MarTech Matrix, a Blurbs production. To see what's coming up next, visit themartechmatrix.com. And if you're looking for your next MarTech solution, start your search at trustblurbs.com, where marketers discover vendors faster.